This is a Best in Climate episode of Earth Feels, where each week your hosts Rose and Christine read to you from some of the best climate-related blogs and articles on the web. Today's Best in Climate episode is Modeling Climate and COVID-19 by Graham Saunders, President of Environment North and author of Gardening in Short Growing Seasons. Graham teaches and researches northern climate issues. He's based in Thunder Bay, Ontario. This was published in his newsletter, Weatherwise, spelled W-H-Y-S, on April 23rd, 2020. I'm Christine, your host for this episode. Let's get started. A week is a long time with COVID-19 numbers, projections, and politics. This week, Weatherwise discusses modeling and begins with the track record of climate models. It is notable that many features of modeling apply to prediction of future temperatures and consequences and what pandemic numbers could result. Both are science-based, or should be, and have outcomes that are greatly influenced by human behavior. Another common feature is lag for effects to manifest. With atmospheric carbon dioxide, it involves years and decades. With COVID-19, it is a week or two, or nothing happens. Both are experiments in real time, and who knew, both attract scammers, hucksters, and conspiracy theorists. This column has discussed historical record climate modeling from time to time. How good have climate models been at predicting the future? A paper in Geophysical Research Letters from December 2019 by Zeke Housefather and colleagues states, "We found that climate models, even those published back in the 1970s, did remarkably well, with 14 out of the 17 projections statistically indistinguishable from what actually occurred." Modeling in 1982 by scientists working for Exxon predicted that by 2019, atmospheric carbon dioxide levels would reach 418 parts per million, or ppm. Late last year, 415 ppm was recorded at Mauna Loa, Hawaii. Exxon's document predicted that such an increase in carbon dioxide would cause global surface temperatures to rise by 0.85 degrees Celsius by 2019. Yes, the model was more complicated than this basic summary suggests. From 1982 to 2019, the global surface temperature has risen by 0.9 degrees Celsius. Exxon's remarkably accurate prediction was consistent with the expert consensus on human-caused climate change. Then, in the late 1980s, Exxon began a well-funded climate misinformation campaign. Patrick Michaels and Richard Lindzen are among the most infamous scientists funded by Exxon. They continued to state rosy predictions for the fossil fuel industry. Michaels claimed in 2013 that, quote, "It's a pretty good bet that we're going to go nearly a quarter of a century, from 1996 to 2020, without warming," unquote. A verified prediction versus deceit. The coronavirus. Last week, Weatherwise discussed the undercounting COVID-19 deaths under the heading Bad Numbers. Undercounting can happen because of insufficient resources or deceit, or perhaps a mix of both. An accurate COVID-19 death count is important for various medical reasons and certainly for planning for the peak, decline of cases, and transition from lockdowns. Whether we call it deceit or deliberate disinformation, there are many examples of bad numbers so far with the current COVID-19 pandemic. Gross examples include China remained open for business in December and well into January with suppression of cases and deaths due to COVID-19. China has revised the numbers of cases and deaths upward. Real accounting or merely acknowledging the visible tip of the iceberg? Russia downplayed the virus, but more recently has imposed severe lockdowns. The reported caseload is now more than Canada and growing faster, but there are far fewer reported deaths reported by Russia. This could be because Canada's mortality rate is about 6 times higher, but I am suspicious of this difference. The United States situation is quite complex. The Trump administration, right-wing media, and Republican states need to, quote, reduce deaths to protect Trump. COVID-19 is reducing the best Trump demographic, old white guys. Perhaps the dead can be arranged to vote. I cannot understand New York City and New York State, Cuomo, governor, versus Trump, and for a while, Cuomo versus Mayor de Blasio. Now, 3,778 more deaths have been added. Some states are now counting probable cases and deaths, and others, mainly Republican states, do not. Modeling COVID-19 cases and deaths. The first modeling of this pandemic I looked at carefully was done at the Imperial College in the UK, a research centre associated with teaching hospitals throughout London. They presented a worst-case scenario in mid-March. A summary was in Weatherwise, March 24th. Models require inputs, known data, and assumptions. They used current, at the time, information and assumed an unchecked epidemic. This would infect 8 out of 10 people, according to the researchers, with 510,000 deaths in the UK and 2.2 million in the US. Other assumptions included a short doubling time in the early weeks of the pandemic and longer doubling times as weeks became months. 2. Farr's law, which states that epidemics and pandemics tend to rise and fall in a bell-shaped pattern or curve. The Imperial College study placed the peak for the UK and US in June. Cases and deaths would then decline on the other side of the peak. How about herd immunity? If a sufficient number of people have antibodies preventing them from contracting or passing on a viral disease, it comes to an end, unless it mutates. For herd immunity to be present, estimates range from 55% and 80% used by the Imperial College of the population would need to be inhospitable to the virus to collapse or disappear. Technically, the virus is not alive, so it cannot die off. Vaccination or exposure or a combination can produce herd immunity. A COVID-19 vaccine is estimated to be 10 to 16 months away, but the strength of immunity from vaccination or exposure will not be known for a considerable time. Building up natural immunity by the herd exposure method means sacrificing the vulnerable. Both Boris Johnson in the UK and Trump in the US were quite taken by ignoring the virus and a business-as-usual approach. The Washington Post reported that Trump asked advisors several times about this option and directly asked Dr. Anthony Fauci, his coronavirus expert, "Why don't we let this wash over the country?" 2 unnamed sources said Fauci was stunned by the question. "Mr. President, many people would die," the doctor reportedly told Trump. Johnson and Trump did eventually listen to expert advice, including the Imperial College mortality projections. These numbers may have been optimistic. Present coronavirus mortality rates, total deaths, total confirmed, in the UK is 13.6% and 5.6% in the US. Most US states, like Canadian provinces and territories, imposed lockdown measures that restrict gatherings and social contact. Federal health officials in Canada announced on April 9th that there could be nearly 32,000 cases of COVID-19 and between 500 and 700 deaths in Canada by April 16th. The announcement included a prediction of 11,000 to 22,000 deaths in Canada over the course of the pandemic, even with relatively strong control measures in place. Total mortality 7 days later was 1,195, and I speculate that this and other updates prompted jurisdictions across Canada to postpone discussion of relaxing lockdowns into May. Trump announced in early April that April 6th would be the peak. Then he changed his prediction to middle of this month would be the peak. Official numbers for April 6 were 1,500 deaths, total 11,128. But every day since then has more fatalities, and 2,800 deaths were recorded on April 21st. The total likely will be 50,000 later today or early tomorrow. Predicting the peak. In Farr's law, the peak is significant. The peak with COVID-19 has become a political exercise in the present situation, especially in the U.S. A peak followed by decline in cases and mortality is reassuring and implies that restrictions will be relaxed. However, the peak with COVID-19 deaths is elusive and the decline often gradual. The United States is leading the world in new coronavirus cases and deaths. Second is Italy, 25,085 deaths, and Spain, 22,157 deaths. Both these countries peaked in early April, but many daily spikes in cases and deaths have occurred since these peaks. The fossil fuel industry spent hundreds of millions of dollars attacking climate scientists and accentuating the supposed uncertainty of climate science. Decades of ignoring and/or denying climate change may have contributed to denial of COVID-19 by many on the right. Trump uses many of the same arguments: hoax, blaming China, ignoring government scientists, etc. You have just listened to the post titled Modeling Climate and COVID-19 by Graham Saunders, posted on his Weatherwise newsletter, April 23rd, 2020. Read with the author's permission, and on our website we'll put some footnotes that were included in the newsletter as well as some links. Thanks for listening.
That's this week's episode of Earth Feels. Special thanks to singer-songwriter Kristen Hoffman for generously allowing us to use Song for the Ocean. Thanks for listening.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode. Catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Children of the earth, I'm calling out. There's a mission for you and for me.